Shall we begin? Well, let's not stand on ceremony. My name is Dave Schoorens. It's spelled S-C-H-O-O-R-E-N-S. Okay. Now, if you look at that and you have trouble pronouncing it, say the word insurance. Now drop the I-N. That's what I used to tell all my high school students. Yeah, it saved a lot of trouble. But it's all right, I've heard every possible iteration of that name, that Flemish name. So what I'm gonna, what I've written is a political thriller, but I like to call it political horror. That was my way to get into the film. But actually, I wrote that into my book when it was published in November of 22. I had no idea that it might be a real thing. Now, as I look at it, you gotta love vampires and zombies and all the supernatural demons that are out there. It makes great fiction, great stories. But the rational side of us is saying, well, crime, such things, right? There are no zombies out there, nothing wrong. And so, and I look at my book as the horror that can happen. And you just have to look at the news these days, and you can see that. Because the novel's about what happens if democracy falls. We find ourselves in an autocracy. Where do we do that? What would be the effect on people? I don't need some sort of cataclysm to propel us into that. I mean, how many of you read Handmaid's Tale? Okay? A global fertility crisis was required. Outstanding book. I read it, I read a sequel to it also, Margaret Atwood. I don't do that. All I need is election. That may be enough. And so, if we lose our democracy, it would be our choice. And, well, we'll see a little bit more about the book later on, but first, I'd like this to be polite and introduce myself a little bit more. Now, that's just a collage of different things. I can belong to the Association of Radical Authors. That's my Tom Clancy-esque kind of photograph right there. We have a few minutes later on, I can tell you a story about I actually met the guy one time. And we get a podcast interview somewhere on Liberty Radio, but I am a veteran of this organization, United States Coast Guard, from long ago, longer than I wish to remember, 1980s. And I've lived in a few places. Anybody care to guess the country in that one? How's that as a hint? Deutschland, Germany. Und ich verstehe ein bisschen Deutsch, aber you That's a little town called Gangelt. In all, I lived in Germany for about 7 years. Why? My wife's an Air Force doc and stationed over there. And I loved every minute of it, even the extra 20 pounds that I gained. So we traveled all over places. Almost all those countries you see there. We went to Poland to learn how to be a Little League baseball umpire. That's a whole other story. I've got 3 college degrees, 2 graduate, 1 undergraduate in biology. And that biology one took me to being a teacher for about 15 years. High school level. AP biology was biology college prep. Biotechnology and chemistry. And we did the AP biology reader thing in Kansas City. Outside of courtesy, there's nothing in my background that says I should write anything. But I did. All you guys offers? It's never too late. I mean, there's nothing that prevents you from trying if you haven't already written something. Nobody was more surprised than me when I got to those wonderful last 2 words of the book called The End. You'd be surprised. think of an idea, you come across an idea and just start and let it take you someplace. And you know what? Outside of holding up my children when they're born, there's nothing like holding something in your own creation. This is mine and no one else has written this. It's mine. That is a real good feeling. So after that, now let's get on to the subject matter, political horror. Now, first thing that comes to mind is movies. What movie is that?
Made from the Bodies and Entrances.
Yes. What year was it made?
Before I was born.
56?
Yes. Yeah, beaten by 1 year. Kevin McCarthy, I think, is the lead actor right there. And you know, the premise is all that stuff floats into the atmosphere, the pods turn into these minute little creatures. That's a little thing that it's a little poster over there. Okay? The thing is, that movie, which was a pretty simple movie, people seem to attribute some sort of political message behind it. It's certainly a horror story, a science fiction horror story. But reviewers and film historians, pundits, and said, oh, it's commenting on Senator McCarthy's in those days in the 50s. He was an extreme senator, held this nation in its grip. When it was McCarthy years, I don't know, that was understood by everybody? Okay. Or maybe it was a comment on communism. The idea of the Eisenhower years that, you know, a certain conformity among people was expected. Because all the pod people, you know, act the same and so forth as a collective. Maybe it's always fun to look at a movie after it's been out and try to attribute a political message to it. Maybe it was just a movie. Like a cigar, sometimes just a cigar. So maybe it was just a thriller and not as close to anything else. However, science fiction, at least in my humble opinion, does represent a pretty good avenue for political commentary. Because you can write it off as just science fiction. You can read into it almost anything you want if it has a political message. Or you can just take it as face value. And in the horror genre, I'm sure there are horror books that are written maybe with a political message in mind, but God, zombies. They don't exist. You can write it off. It's very comforting. I remember seeing a lot of movies with a political message. How many of you have seen this one? Burt Lancaster, Kirk Douglas, Golden Age of Hollywood, 7 Days in May. It's about a military takeover of the United States, an overthrow of a duly elected government. Well, that would never happen, right? And the villain in this is the 4-star Air Force chairman of the Chief of Staff. And that's played by Burt Lancaster. You've seen other movies, probably, on TCL or wherever. Or maybe this one here. Nuclear war seems to be quite a prevalent genre for political commentary. Have you ever seen Friends? Yeah, it's just a horrifying movie. It's about a nuclear war, the aftermath of it in England, 1984. Something closer to home, the day after. Okay, you want to have fun with nuclear war? It's Dr. Strangelove. Stanley Kubrick. And even this one here, War of the Worlds. Straightforward up, you know, alien invasion. There are some who would say that H.G. Wells was writing that as the aliens stood in for the Germans. Since this was written before the First World War, it's a plausible hypothesis. Of course, H.G. is dead, again, we ask him. And we can update the political commentary movies with this one here, now to climate change. The day after. The scientists in me is telling me it can't happen that fast. Okay, physics just don't work. But it makes for a pretty good leading with that way. There's something that inspired my novel, political commentary. Its own version of the horror. It was it's an old book. Sinclair Lewis, 1935. It can't happen here. How many of you have read that? Do you like it?
I did.
Yeah. It imagines the fall of democracy in the United States into a kind of fascist, corporate kind of government. The language occasionally is a bit archaic, but it's still a pretty easy read. But you're thinking when he wrote that, the emergence of a populist dictator. In 1935, how many democracies do you think existed on this planet? 100? 50? How about 10? We had dictators, called them Nazis, called them Stalinists, Japanese imperialists, that spanned the globe. We were decidedly outnumbered. And 1935 was the thing that going on in the United States. When your grandparents would know. What happened then? 1930s. Great Depression. And there was a lot of searching for the solution, and democracy seemed to be moving too slow. Even FDR was in it. Oops. Make sure I'm in the right place, yeah. Democracy was seen as something that could not get the job done. A more authoritarian government. Those are Americans. Nearby here, actually. That's Fritz Schoorens, the guy up there in front, on the platform there. He was a leader of the American Nazi movement. He imagined himself to be an American Führer. And was fairly popular. What gauge their popularity? This may be hard to believe. We can have a look at that history. But February 20th, 1939. This is only a matter of months before the Second World War kicked off. In Madison Square Garden in New York City, 20,000 people attended openly as Nazis. All Americans, right there. With pictures of George Washington and Adolf Hitler, often side by side. Now, that's the kind of thing that Sinclair Lewis was warning about in his political horror novel. We even had, by the way, Hitler youth camps, essentially, Americanized versions of that, on Long Island, of all places. All the vestiges of those things have been gotten rid of. And those American Nazis, the German American movement, a number of them wound up incarcerated by the FBI once the war started. But it's frightening to see that how many people, Americans, we probably call it patriots, themselves patriots, went along with this. And were sympathetic with it. So, Lewis's book, even today, serves as a warning. Okay, I can be egotistical for 1 second here and say that my book is not dated for Lewis's book. It can still happen here. It can happen here. Do you think it can happen here? See some nodding heads. Yeah, it's a chance. And that's something I guess we have to all keep in mind. So that's where maybe a little bit of political horror becomes useful. As a way, I have something to say. I've said it in the form of a novel. I didn't write an academic tone that hardly anybody's going to, pick up and read. Maybe a story, an anecdote, a story. That sometimes is far more powerful. So I went through when I was writing this, and I was doing, the end is done, now I'll do the author's note at the back. Oh, thank God this thing's ending finally. And so I went through the various genres. Right, this is a quote right from the author's note. And I settled on that, political horror. I often call it political thriller, but I like to call it also a political horror story. We've managed to elect enough perfectly natural and moral humans already. So, imagine my shock and horror when it turned out that somebody already said it, and I thought, great, I thought a new thing. Well, yeah, there's hardly anything original left in this planet. So it turns out to be a real genre. And of course, this is just one instance of that. An article that I found that went through about 10 different movies that at least the critics and perhaps the people who made it suggested that it was horror, like Get Out, Don't Believe Nice People, and the Purge movies. Very nice, wonderful fantasy, like one from that. And then the other one, recognize that one? Third one? Stepford Wives. This goes back a few decades. Now we call them senators from Alabama. So I call mine political horror because it's plausible. And then it goes like that. It couldn't happen. And that's the way I do it. Political horror, one of the qualifications might be that it couldn't happen. If you're doing straight up, non-plot, allegorical kind of stuff from science fiction. Just couldn't happen. And as I often say, hoping my story does not become history. And that's just some of the people who have read it, commented on Amazon. I'll brag a little bit. I've got 11 reviews so far, 4.5 out of 5. In Canada, it's 4.8. And that's it. Okay, it's getting late. Do you have any questions or thoughts? Other movies that had an impression on you was kind of the same way? Anything, a book? Teacher me is what I've done. 2, 3, 4, 5. When I reach 10, it's like, okay, this is 7, 8. Yeah, I'm good to go, guys. If you're good to go. All set?
Thank you.
I hope we can.